I was seconds away from saying I do, then the doors burst open and my life turned upside down. The woman standing there, holding two small children by the hand, looked directly at me with eyes full of determination and pain. But it wasn't her presence that made my blood run cold. It wasn't even the words she was about to speak. It was what I saw glinting on her wrist, something that shouldn't have been there, something that changed everything I thought I knew about the man I was about to marry. You'll never believe what I saw next. Before we dive in, I'd like to know, where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your country or city in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories of justice and revenge reach across the globe. And if you're new here, welcome to Revenge with Nick, the channel where betrayal gets exposed and justice always wins. Hit that subscribe button and please ring the notification bell. Now, let's go back to where it all started, the morning that was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My name is Danielle, and 6 hours earlier, I was sitting in the bridal suite of St. Mark's Episcopal Church, my hands trembling not from nerves, but from pure, overwhelming joy. The scent of white roses and baby's breath filled the air, mixing with my mother's familiar perfume as she gently adjusted my veil. The soft chatter of my bridesmaids created a warm background hum, punctuated by the distant sound of the organ being tuned for the ceremony. "You look absolutely radiant, sweetheart," my mom whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she smoothed a strand of hair behind my ear. "Your grandmother would have been so proud to see you in her dress." I touched the delicate pearl buttons running down the back of the vintage gown, the same buttons my grandmother had fastened on her wedding day in 1952 and my mother in 1978. Now it was my turn to carry on the tradition. "Mrs. Thompson is going to cry when she sees you," laughed my maid of honor, Kelly, as she applied one final touch of lip gloss to my lips. "She's been saying since we were 12 that you'd be the most beautiful bride she'd ever seen." My dad peeked his head around the door, his eyes immediately misting over. "5 minutes, princess. You ready to become Mrs. Jason Mitchell?" Mrs. Jason Mitchell. The name I'd been practicing for months, writing in the margins of notebooks, signing on practice documents. It felt like a dream finally coming true. I should tell you about Jason. God, where do I even start? We met 3 years ago at a coffee shop near the elementary school where I teach 4th grade. I was grading papers, and he struck up a conversation about the stack of creative writing assignments I was working through. He was charming in that effortless way, not flashy or over the top, just genuinely interested in my work, in the kids I taught, in me. Jason worked in financial planning, helping small businesses manage their investments. He was the kind of man my parents immediately loved, respectful, ambitious, the type who remembered my dad's birthday and sent flowers to my mom on Mother's Day even though we weren't even engaged yet. "That boy's got good character," my father used to say after Jason would leave from Sunday dinner. "He looks you in the eye when he shakes your hand." Jason's best man, Derek, had been his college roommate and business partner. They'd built their financial planning firm from nothing, and Derek often joked that Jason was the heart of their operation, the one who really cared about their clients, who'd work late into the night making sure every detail was perfect. Even now, as I sat in that bridal suite, I could hear Derek outside in the hallway, talking quietly with the groomsmen. Something about Jason being nervous, which made me smile. He'd been so calm through all the wedding planning, so steady and sure. It was sweet to think he was finally feeling some pre-ceremony jitters. Actually, now that I think back, there had been little things. Small moments that didn't quite add up, but I'd brushed them off as pre-wedding stress. Like how Jason had been checking his phone constantly for the past week. Even during our rehearsal dinner, he'd excused himself twice to take calls, coming back with an apologetic smile and some explanation about a client emergency. "Sorry, babe," he'd said, slipping his phone into his jacket pocket. "You know how Mr. Henderson gets when the market fluctuates." Or the way he'd seemed distracted when we were addressing wedding invitations. I'd catch him staring off into space, and when I'd ask what he was thinking about, he'd just pull me close and say, "How lucky I am." But the strangest thing happened just 20 minutes before the ceremony. Derek had rushed into the groom's suite. I could hear raised voices through the thin church walls. Something about handling it later and not now, man, not today. When I asked Kelly if she knew what was going on, she just shrugged and said boys were always dramatic about wedding day logistics. Standing there in my grandmother's dress, holding the bouquet of white peonies Jason had specifically requested because they were his favorite flowers, I pushed those nagging thoughts away. Every couple has stress. Every wedding has last-minute complications. I took a deep breath and looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The woman looking back at me was glowing, ready to pledge her life to the man she loved more than anything. This is going to be the happiest day of my life, I whispered to my reflection. If only I had known how wrong I was. Before we head into the church, I have to ask, have you ever ignored red flags in a relationship because you were so in love? Those little moments where something fell off, but you convinced yourself you were just being paranoid? Drop a yes or a no in the comments and tell me about it. And if you're already hooked on this story, smash the subscribe and like buttons because what's about to happen in that church will shock you to your core. The music began, Pachelbel's Canon in D, just like we'd rehearsed. My dad offered me his arm, and together we walked toward those heavy wooden doors that separated me from my future. St. Mark's was breathtaking. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting jeweled patterns across the stone floors. White roses and greenery adorned every pew, and our 150 guests stood as the doors opened, their faces lit with joy and anticipation. But all I could see was Jason. He stood at the altar in his navy blue suit, the one we'd chosen together, because it brought out his eyes. His sandy brown hair was perfectly styled, and his hands were clasped in front of him in that endearing nervous gesture I'd come to love. When our eyes met, he smiled that slow, genuine smile that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. Derek stood beside him as his best man, grinning from ear to ear. My bridesmaids were already in position, their dusty rose dresses creating a perfect backdrop for what should have been the most romantic moment of my life. Camera flashes twinkled like stars as Mrs. Henderson from down the street dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. My fourth-grade students' parents waved from the back pews. Even old Mr. Peterson, who'd never missed a school function, was there beaming with pride. Everything was perfect. Absolutely perfect. The processional music faded, and Reverend Williams opened his prayer book with a warm smile. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today in the sight of God. Slam. The sound of the church doors being thrown open echoed through the sanctuary like a gunshot. Every head turned in perfect unison, a collective gasp rippling through the congregation. A woman strode down the aisle with purpose and determination. She was maybe 32, with shoulder-length auburn hair and wearing a simple black dress. But what made my heart stop weren't her clothes or her confident stride. It was the two children holding her hands. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, with Jason's exact nose and chin. A boy who couldn't have been older than 7, with Jason's sandy brown hair and those same green eyes I'd been staring into for 3 years. The woman's voice rang clear and strong through the stunned silence. Stop this wedding. He is my husband. The words hit me like physical blows. Husband. My legs felt weak, but somehow I remained standing, my bouquet trembling in my white-knuckled grip. I could hear my mother's sharp intake of breath behind me. My father stepped forward protectively, but I held up a hand to stop him. My eyes were locked on Jason's face, and what I saw there told me everything I needed to know. His face had gone completely pale, all the color draining from his cheeks like water from a broken dam. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, and his hands were shaking at his sides. Not the reaction of an innocent man. Not the reaction of someone falsely accused. The woman reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, her movements deliberate and calm despite the chaos she'd just created. I have photos, she announced, her voice carrying easily through the acoustics of the church. She held up her phone, and even from where I stood at the altar, I could see images flashing across the screen. Jason with his arm around this woman. Jason kissing her cheek. Jason sitting by a fireplace I didn't recognize, the two children curled up against him like they belonged there. Marriage certificate, she continued, scrolling to another image. Dated 3 years ago. 2 months before he met you, Danielle. She knew my name. Of course she knew my name. The whispers started then, a low buzz of shock and confusion spreading through our guests like wildfire. I could hear Mrs. Henderson's scandalized, "Oh my goodness," and my Aunt Rita's sharp, "What in the hell?" But what broke my heart completely was when the little girl looked up at Jason and said in a voice so soft I almost missed it, "Daddy, why is that lady wearing a princess dress?" The little boy, who looked so much like Jason it was impossible to deny, just stared with wide, confused eyes. Jason finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled croak. It's not what it looks like. I can explain this. There's been a misunderstanding. The woman, his wife, my brain supplied with cruel clarity, fixed him with a look of pure contempt. Tell her the truth, Jason. Or I will. The church fell into an eerie silence. Even the children seemed to sense the weight of the moment, pressing closer to their mother's sides. I stood there in my grandmother's dress, surrounded by the remains of what was supposed to be the most beautiful day of my life, and felt something cold and analytical settle over me. The initial shock was fading, replaced by something harder, more focused. My eyes moved from Jason's guilty face to the woman who had just destroyed my wedding, taking in every detail. Her confident posture, the protective way she held her children, the designer handbag that must have cost more than I made in a month as a teacher. But then my gaze stopped on something that made my blood freeze in my veins. There, glinting on her left wrist, was a bracelet I recognized. A delicate gold chain with a small diamond pendant, distinctive because of the unusual setting, custom-made and expensive. The exact same bracelet Jason had given me for my birthday 2 months ago, telling me it was a special design he'd had created just for me. The bracelet, he'd said, represented his unique love, something no other woman would ever have. Except here it was, on another woman's wrist. His wife's wrist. I felt something crack inside my chest, but it wasn't my heart breaking. It was something much more dangerous. It was the sound of my trust shattering, and underneath it, something cold and calculating was taking its place. This wasn't just about betrayal. This wasn't just about a secret wife and children I'd never known existed. This was something much worse. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about betrayal. It was something much darker. What would you do if this happened on your wedding day? Be honest, comment below. The next few minutes were a blur of hushed conversations and uncomfortable shuffling. Reverend Williams, bless his heart, tried to maintain some semblance of order, quietly suggesting that perhaps we should move this discussion to a more private setting. If everyone could please make their way to the reception hall, he announced in his most diplomatic voice, "I'm sure this misunderstanding can be resolved shortly." But I knew there would be no resolution. Not the kind he was hoping for anyway. Most of our guests filed out reluctantly, casting backwards glances and whispering among themselves. My parents lingered, my mother's face a mask of protective fury, my father looking like he wanted to physically remove Jason from the premises. "Mom, Dad," I said quietly, my voice surprisingly steady, "please give us a few minutes." "Danielle, sweetheart," my mother started. "Please." They exchanged a look, but respected my wishes, following the last of the guests out of the sanctuary. Soon it was just the 5 of us, me, Jason, this woman, and the 2 children who were clinging to her dress. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Jason kept opening his mouth as if to speak, then closing it again. The woman, I still didn't even know her name, stood perfectly still, waiting. But I couldn't stop staring at that bracelet. The memory crashed over me like a wave. Jason presenting it to me over dinner at Romano's, our favorite Italian restaurant. "I had this made specially for you," he'd said, his eyes twinkling with what I'd thought was love. The jeweler said he'd never seen a design quite like it. "It's completely unique, just like yours to me." I'd worn it every day since then. It was on my wrist at that very moment, hidden beneath the long lace sleeves of my wedding dress. 2 identical, supposedly one-of-a-kind bracelets. My mind began to race, pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know I'd been solving clicking into place with horrible clarity. If Jason had lied about the bracelet, what else had he lied about? The business trips. The late nights at the office. The weekends he said he was visiting his sick aunt in Portland, the aunt I'd never met because she was too ill for visitors. "What's your name?" I asked the woman, my voice cutting through the tension. She looked surprised by the question, as if she'd expected anger or tears instead of curiosity. Amanda, she said carefully. Amanda Mitchell. Mitchell. She'd kept his name. And how long have you been married to my fiancé? The word fiancé tasted bitter now, like ashes in my mouth. 3.5 years, Amanda replied. We have a house in Portland. Jason commutes to his office here in the city twice a week for work. Portland, where his sick aunt lived. The children, Emma and Lucas, I learned, were getting restless. Emma kept tugging on Amanda's dress, whispering that she was hungry, while Lucas stared at me with the uncensored curiosity of a 7-year-old. Jason, I said, finally looking directly at him. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. Is it true? His shoulders sagged in defeat. Danielle, yes. But it's complicated. Complicated? The word came out sharper than I intended, causing little Emma to step behind her mother. I took a breath, modulating my voice. What's complicated about having a wife and 2 children you never mentioned? I was going to tell you, he said desperately. I was trying to figure out how. When? I interrupted. When were you going to tell me? After we were married? After we had children of our own? Or were you just planning to live this double life forever? Amanda spoke up, her voice tight with her own barely controlled anger. He told me you were a client. That the relationship was purely professional. When I saw the engagement announcement posted on your social media, I knew I had to act. The pieces kept falling into place, each one more sickening than the last. My mind flashed back to all the times Jason had insisted on separate bank accounts because financial independence is important in a marriage. The way he'd always paid for everything in cash when we were together. How he'd never wanted to post photos of us on social media because he was private about personal matters. I thought about the wedding planning, how he'd been strangely hands-off about most details. How he'd insisted we keep the guest list small, claiming he didn't have much family to invite. How he'd suggested a destination honeymoon to Europe, far away from anywhere Amanda and the children might accidentally run into us. Every lie, every manipulation, every moment I'd thought was love had actually been careful calculation. But there was still something that didn't add up. Something that made this more than just a case of a man living a double life. Amanda, I said slowly, that bracelet you're wearing. Where did you get it? She looked down at her wrist, touching the delicate gold chain. Jason gave it to me for our anniversary last year. He said it was custom-made, that there wasn't another one like it in the world. I pulled up the sleeve of my wedding dress, revealing the identical bracelet on my own wrist. Amanda's eyes widened, and I saw the exact moment she understood what it meant. Not only had Jason been lying to both of us, he'd been lazy about it. Sloppy. Using the same gifts, the same lines, probably the same restaurants and date spots. But that still wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what it meant about our finances. Jason had insisted on keeping our money separate, but he'd also asked me to contribute to what he called our shared future fund, money that was supposed to go toward the down payment on a house after we were married. I'd been putting aside $500 a month for 2 years, trusting him to manage it along with his contributions. If he was supporting a wife and 2 children in Portland, where was the money for our house coming from? Where was the money for Amanda's designer handbag, for the custom jewelry, for what looked like expensive clothes on both children? A horrible suspicion began to form in my mind. Amanda, I said carefully, how does Jason support you and the children? He has his business here in the city, she said, confusion evident in her voice. The financial planning firm. He brings home about $8,000 a month. $8,000 a month. I knew exactly how much money Jason's business generated because he'd shown me the books when we'd talked about our future. The firm brought in about $16,000 a month total, split between Jason and Derek. Which meant Jason was giving Amanda 2/3 of his income and somehow still managing to wine and dine me, pay for an expensive engagement ring, and contribute to our shared future fund. The math didn't work. Unless... Jason, I said, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper, show me your phone. What? Why? Show me your phone. With trembling hands, he pulled out his iPhone and handed it to me. I opened his banking app. I knew the password because we'd talked about sharing financial information after we were married. There it was, in stark black and white. Regular transfers from our shared future fund, the account I'd been contributing to, directly into an account labeled Family Expenses. He'd been using my money to support his real family while planning to commit bigamy with me. I handed the phone back to him and looked around the church, this beautiful, sacred space where I'd planned to pledge my life to a man who had been systematically stealing from me while living a complete lie. When I spoke again, my voice was calm, almost conversational. Amanda, you said you have a house in Portland? Yes, we bought it 2 years ago. Jason said his business was doing well enough that we could finally stop renting. 2 years ago. Right around the time I'd started contributing to our future fund. I looked at Jason, this man I'd thought I loved, this man I'd trusted with my heart and my financial future, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. You didn't just lie to me, I said quietly. You didn't just betray me. You stole from me to build a life with someone else. Jason opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. I need both of you to leave, I said, looking between him and Amanda. Take the children and go. This conversation is over. Danielle, please, let me explain, Jason started. No. The word came out sharp and final. You've explained enough. You've both explained enough. I turned away from them, walking back toward the altar where my bouquet lay forgotten on the steps. Behind me, I heard whispered conversation, the sounds of Jason trying to convince Amanda to leave quietly, the children's confused questions about why the pretty lady in the dress looked so sad. But I wasn't sad. Not anymore. I was furious. If you were her, what would your next move be? Quietly walk away, or plan the ultimate payback? Comment your answer. By the time I made it home to my apartment, the numbness had worn off, and the full weight of what had happened was crashing over me in waves. My living room looked like a shrine to my ruined relationship. Wedding presents were stacked on every surface, still wrapped in their silver and white paper. My suitcase sat by the door, packed for our honeymoon to Tuscany, a trip that would never happen. The walls were covered with photos of Jason and me, at Christmas, at my birthday dinner, at the beach house we'd rented last summer. All lies. Every single memory tainted. I sat on my couch in my grandmother's wedding dress, still in full makeup and with my hair still perfectly curled, and tried to cry. But the tears wouldn't come. Instead, there was just this cold, analytical rage building in my chest like pressure in a kettle. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I'd gotten home. Messages from my parents, from Kelly, from wedding guests who'd witnessed the disaster and wanted to make sure I was okay. But I ignored them all. I needed to think. I pulled out my laptop and began going through everything systematically, the way I'd been trained to research as a teacher. If Jason had been lying about his marital status and using my money to support his real family, what else had he been lying about? Our shared Google Drive folder was still active. Jason had given me access so I could help with wedding planning and see our future fund statements. But now I started looking at everything with new eyes. Bank statements that showed regular large cash withdrawals, money that couldn't be traced once it left the account. Credit card bills for purchases in Portland that he'd explained as business expenses. Receipts for children's clothes and toys that he'd claimed were gifts for his business partner's kids. The evidence was everywhere, hidden in plain sight because I'd trusted him completely. But the worst discovery came when I found an email thread buried deep in his work folder. Messages between Jason and Derek about something called the Portland situation. Derek, man, you can't keep this up forever. What happens when she wants to meet Amanda? Jason, Amanda thinks Danielle is just a client. As long as they never meet, it's fine. Derek, and what about the money? Using her savings to buy Amanda's house was risky. Jason, it's not stealing if we're going to be married. What's hers will be mine anyway, legally. Derek, you're playing with fire, bro. Jason, I've got it under control. Danielle trusts me completely. I read that last line 3 times, each reading making me feel sicker. Danielle trusts me completely. He'd been counting on that. Banking on it, literally. My trust, my love, my complete faith in him had been a tool he'd used to steal from me and manipulate me. My phone rang and Kelly's name flashed on the screen. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Danny? Oh my God, honey, are you okay? I've been so worried. Kelly, I interrupted. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Anything. Did you ever have any doubts about Jason? Any red flags that you maybe didn't want to mention because you thought I was happy? There was a long pause. Too long. Kelly? God, Danny, I should have said something. I should have trusted my instincts. What instincts? It was little things. Like how he never wanted to double date with Mark and me. How he always insisted on picking restaurants where we never ran into anyone he knew. And that time I saw him at the grocery store when he was supposed to be out of town for work. Remember, you were sick with the flu and he couldn't visit because he was in Portland. I remembered. I'd been disappointed but understanding when Jason said he couldn't risk catching my flu before an important client meeting. He was buying kids cereal and juice boxes, Kelly continued. When I said hi, he looked terrified, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. He said he was shopping for his neighbor's kids, but it seemed off. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were so happy, Kelly said, her voice breaking. You were glowing every time you talked about him. And I thought maybe I was just being paranoid because of what happened with Mark's ex. I convinced myself I was seeing problems that weren't there. After I hung up with Kelly, I made a list. Everything Jason had taken from me, financially and emotionally. Every lie he'd told. Every moment he'd looked me in the eyes and deceived me. The future fund, I'd contributed $12,000 to over 2 years. The expensive engagement ring I'd helped pay for by covering his share of dinners and weekend trips. The wedding expenses, the dress alterations, the flowers, the catering deposit, all money that could have gone toward my actual future instead of funding his elaborate deception. But beyond the money, there was the emotional theft. 3 years of my life. 3 years of planning a future that was never real. 3 years of falling deeper in love with a man who was using me. I thought about Amanda and those children. Emma, who looked so confused by the chaos at the church. Lucas, who'd called Jason daddy with such innocent trust. They were victims too, innocent casualties of Jason's selfishness. But unlike me, they didn't know the truth yet. They didn't know that daddy had been planning to abandon them for a new life with a new wife. They didn't know that the house they lived in had been bought with another woman's money. I closed my laptop and looked around my apartment one more time. At the wedding dress I was still wearing, at the gifts that would need to be returned, at the photos I'd have to take down. Then I whispered to the empty room, "You ruined my wedding day, Jason. I'll ruin your life." But first, I needed to make some phone calls. The next morning, I woke up with absolute clarity about what needed to happen. I'd spent 3 years being the trusting, understanding girlfriend. Today, I was going to be something else entirely. My first call was to Linda Morrison, a family lawyer my aunt had recommended when she was going through her divorce. Linda agreed to see me that afternoon on an emergency basis. Bigamy is a felony in Oregon, Linda explained after I'd laid out the entire situation. But proving intent can be tricky. The fact that he was actively planning to marry you while already married, combined with the financial fraud, using your money to support his existing family, that's a strong case. What about the money he stole? That's where it gets interesting. Technically, since you weren't married, he had no legal right to use your funds for his family expenses. We can go after him for conversion, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. How much are we talking about? I'd done the math multiple times. $12,000 in direct contributions to what he called our shared future fund. But probably closer to $20,000 when you factor in all the expenses I covered so he could send money to Portland. Linda whistled low. We can definitely work with that. My second call was to the Oregon State Police. Bigamy might be hard to prove intent on, but financial fraud was black and white. Ma'am, we'll need documentation, the detective explained. Bank records, email evidence, anything that shows a pattern of deception and misuse of funds. I have everything, I told him. Email records, bank statements, receipts. He kept meticulous records because he thought I'd never see them. Jason's attention to detail, something I'd always admired about him, was about to become his downfall. But I wasn't done. Legal consequences were just the beginning. That evening, I sat down at my computer and began crafting a social media post. Not an angry rant or an emotional breakdown, but a calm, factual account of what had happened. I included photos, Jason and me at various events, the identical bracelets, even a screenshot of the bank transfer showing my money going to his family expenses account. Many of you witnessed what happened at my wedding yesterday, I wrote. I want you to know the full truth about what Jason Mitchell has been doing for the past 3 years. I laid out everything in clear, simple language. The secret wife and children. The financial fraud. The systematic lying. The way he'd used my trust and love as tools to manipulate me. I'm sharing this not for sympathy, but because I believe people deserve to know who they're really dealing with. If you're in business with Jason Mitchell or considering any financial dealings with him, please be aware of his willingness to lie and steal from people who trust him. Before I posted it, I sent a text to my parents, Kelly, and a few close friends, giving them a heads up about what I was about to do. My mom called immediately. Sweetheart, are you sure about this? Once you post something like this, you can't take it back. I'm sure, Mom. He counted on me being too ashamed or heartbroken to fight back. He was wrong. The post went live at 8 p.m. on a Sunday night. By Monday morning, it had been shared 47 times. By Tuesday afternoon, over 200 people had seen it, including several of Jason's business clients. But I saved the best for last. On Thursday, I printed out every piece of evidence I'd gathered, bank records, emails, photos, Amanda's contact information, and put it all in a manila envelope. Then I drove to Jason and Derek's office. Their secretary, Mrs. Patterson, had always been sweet to me. She'd helped coordinate some of the wedding planning logistics and had seemed genuinely excited about my and Jason's future together. Danielle, she exclaimed when I walked in. Oh, honey, I heard about the wedding. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? I'm getting better every day, I told her truthfully. Is Derek available? I need to speak with him about Jason. Derek's office was at the back of the suite, separated from Jason's by a shared waiting area. When Mrs. Patterson announced me, Derek came out looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past week. Danielle, he said carefully, I want you to know how sorry I am about all this. I should have said something sooner. Derek. I held up the manila envelope. We both know you should have. The color drained from his face. I opened the envelope and spread the contents across the coffee table in their waiting area. Bank statements showing the transfers from my account to Jason's family expenses. Email screenshots of Derek and Jason's conversations about the Portland situation. Photos of the identical bracelets. Jason has been committing fraud, I said matter-of-factly. He's been using my money to support his real family while planning to commit bigamy. And according to these emails, you've known about it the entire time. Derek sank into a chair, his head in his hands. God, Danielle, I told him this would blow up eventually. I told him he was being an idiot. But you didn't try to stop him. You didn't warn me. You stood as his best man at a wedding you knew was illegal. I thought maybe he'd figure it out. Maybe he'd come clean to Amanda and ask for a divorce or break things off with you before it went too far. Instead, he stole $20,000 from me to buy his wife a house. Mrs. Patterson gasped from behind her desk. I'd forgotten she was there, listening to every word. Derek, I continued, I've already filed a police report and spoken with a lawyer. Jason is going to face criminal charges. But you need to decide whether you want to be complicit in this, or whether you want to do the right thing. I slid a business card across the table, Linda Morrison's contact information. If you cooperate with the investigation and help us recover the stolen funds, my lawyer says the DA might be willing to work with you. If you don't. I shrugged. Well, accessory to fraud is a serious charge. Derek looked at the business card like it might bite him. What do you want me to do? Tell the truth. Provide documentation of Jason's financial dealings through the business. And terminate his partnership. Terminate his partnership? Derek, he's about to be arrested for bigamy and fraud. As the majority partner, you have the right to dissolve the partnership for criminal conduct. Do you really want his name associated with your business when that happens? There was a long silence. Finally, Derek nodded. You're right. God, you're absolutely right. I'll call your lawyer this afternoon. As I walked back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in days. Not happy exactly, but satisfied. Justice was in motion. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Amanda. Can we talk? Would you forgive him after all this? Or do exactly what she did?" Yes or no in the comments. I met Amanda at a coffee shop downtown, choosing a public place in case the conversation got heated. But when I saw her walk in with Emma and Lucas, both children clutching coloring books and looking much more relaxed than they had at the church, I realized this wasn't going to be a confrontation. "Thank you for meeting me," Amanda said, settling the kids at a nearby table with juice boxes and crayons. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I owe you an apology." That wasn't what I'd expected. An apology? I should have contacted you directly instead of just watching from a distance. When I hired the private investigator and found out about your engagement, I spent months just observing, following you on social media, learning about your life. I should have warned you about what kind of man Jason really was instead of letting you plan a wedding to a married man. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation, but all I saw was genuine regret. "Amanda, you saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. If you hadn't shown up, I would have married him." "And then what?" "He would have been a bigamist. We would have both been his victims and the children." She trailed off, glancing over at Emma and Lucas, who were deeply absorbed in their coloring. "What's going to happen with them?" I asked. "I've filed for divorce. Full custody, obviously." "The house will have to be sold," Amanda continued. "It was bought with your money, so legally, you have a claim on it. But I want to make this right. The kids and I can move in with my sister in Seattle until I figure out our next steps." "What about your life in Portland?" "Your job." Amanda managed a rueful smile. "What life?" "I was a stay-at-home mom married to a man who was living a double life. This is my chance to start over, to build something real for my children." We talked for over an hour. About Jason's lies, about the signs we'd both missed, about the future we were both facing as single women who'd been betrayed by the same man. "You know what's funny?" Amanda said as we were getting ready to leave. "I used to be jealous of you." Jason would come home from his business trips talking about this successful teacher he was working with, how intelligent and independent she was. I thought he was having an emotional affair. He was having a whole other life. And now we're both free of him. As I drove home from that meeting, I realized Amanda was right. For the first time in 3 years, I was completely free. Free to make decisions based on what I wanted, not what Jason wanted. Free to spend my money on my actual future, not on funding someone else's lie. Free to trust my instincts instead of dismissing them because I was in love. 1 year later. I'm writing this from my new apartment, a beautiful one-bedroom place downtown that I was able to afford because I got back every penny Jason stole from me, plus damages. The legal case took 8 months to resolve, but it was straightforward once Derek cooperated and provided all the financial records. Jason pled guilty to fraud and attempted bigamy to avoid a lengthy trial. He's serving 18 months in minimum security prison and will be on probation for 3 years after that. His financial planning license was revoked, and he owes restitution to both me and Amanda. Derek restructured the business and invited me to do the bookkeeping part-time, which has been a great supplement to my teaching salary. It turns out I'm pretty good at spotting financial irregularities, go figure. Amanda and the kids are thriving in Seattle. She went back to school to become a paralegal and sends me photos of Emma and Lucas at soccer games and school plays. They're just normal, happy kids now, which is all they ever should have been. As for me, I've learned to trust myself again. My instincts, my judgment, my ability to spot red flags and act on them. I've started a small blog called Financial Red Flags for Women that helps other people identify signs of financial abuse and fraud in relationships. It started small, but it's growing every month. Do I want to get married someday? Maybe. But not because I need to complete some fairy tale narrative or because I'm afraid of being alone. If I ever walk down another aisle, it will be to marry someone who sees me as an equal partner, not a mark to be manipulated. Someone recently asked me if I regret not marrying Jason before I found out the truth. If I wish I'd been spared the public humiliation of having my wedding crashed. The answer is no. Absolutely not. Because that moment, standing at the altar in my grandmother's dress, Watching my world crumble around me, that was the moment I discovered who I really was. Not Jason's victim. Not the naive teacher who got taken for a ride. I was a woman who could face the truth, no matter how ugly. A woman who could fight back. A woman who could turn her worst day into her greatest strength. I thought my wedding was going to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it became the most important lesson I ever learned. Revenge isn't about anger. It's about reclaiming your power. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply refusing to be anyone's victim ever again. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder to trust their instincts. And subscribe to Revenge with Nick for more stories where justice wins. Because at the end of the day, the truth always finds a way to surface, and when it does, those who chose deception over honesty will face the consequences they've earned. Thank you for coming this far with Revenge with Nick. Always remember that the best revenge is living your truth.